one. Just to kind of respect our time and everything, I think you've seen the documents and you kind of know each other. If you want, read the little list. There's a little paragraph at the end, or the last page and a half I sent out before. You can read about each person. I think I've met most of you online already. More than anything, we just want to start coordinating activities, and a lot has already happened. You guys are the second meeting officially, that some of you couldn't make the first one. We're focusing in on trying to figure out how to, I would say, flesh out how to get the people I'm calling the AI people and the climate smart ag and forestry people connecting and working together so that we can actually start moving forward to generate our, the overall proposal. The AI themes are kind of defined in preliminary discussions have been decision-making and optimization in an uncertain and non-stationary environment, and then multimodal and multi-scale data and modeling is what I've been calling that, the second one. And then the third theme is social, trustworthy AI. That's being led by Dietram and Kai Ping in life science communication. And they were both on last time around. And then we have 5 areas: crops, livestock, forestry, soils, food security, and then kind of a cross-cutting theme of remote sensing. And what we're trying to get that is to get the groups working together so that we can flesh these things out. And then various groups, particularly to help you understand what you got to do, you need a budget. We can all dream up things, but you need, how much dollars do I get to spend so I can know how to dream up my activities? And we kind of made some broad cutting there. We had salaries from pretty much everyone. Oh, hey, Catherine's on too. And so, hi. And so what we're trying to do there is just made some broad brush strokes with the sort of salaries of everyone and the costs of postdocs and the costs of grad students and research software engineers. And kind of, we came up with those broad cuts of 8 million for the AI, sort of the life LNS and engineering, about 1 million for life science communication to do the social themes, 6 for the climate smart ag people, split between the crops, livestock, food security, and forestry and soils. A couple million for outreach, which we broader impacts. We're going to need some help on that. Anyone's interested in that, we've got some people. And then some more on project management, sort of to cover the logistics, hire a program director, a project director, things like that. I'd like to just pause there and sort of take open-ended questions. I'm hoping a lot of you are somewhat engaged, but thoughts or just questions?
Can I make comments? For those that weren't here last time, so we kind of basically tried to get the ball rolling again. There were, we had some kind of constructive feedback about, what was missing in terms of the pre-proposal that we should try to deliver on, for the main proposal. Partially that was confined by the structure of the pre-proposal that NSF asked, but there's certainly the points were right on. And so that motivated creating this one document, which is called Small Group Discussions, which hopefully you've seen an invitation to or seen your name tagged in it or something. And it's also sitting in our, I'll drop it in the chat here, but it's also inside of that shared Google Drive area. And so that's organized by these different topics that Paul just mentioned. And it's partially to try to get around the scheduling, problems of too big of a group and to try to get small groups together. And so we wrote some, basically, it's kind of like a worksheet or something, like some prompts, which are to try to sharpen the statement about, what is the problem we want to solve? What are sort of the most obvious solutions that come to mind? What's unique or difficult about that problem that requires new solutions? What do we propose to actually do? And then some kind of follow-ups, which are things like, how might this influence other fields? And then also, what is it where, can you identify anything where it being an institute has as being a large institute as opposed to a bunch of small projects has a particular advantage? So that's what's there. So if people have questions about how that's set up, please let me know, or what's expected. It's hopefully somewhat self-explanatory, but the goal is that people will kind of attach names to it and try to self-organize some small meetings. And hopefully by a week from now, for the next Wednesday meeting, we will have gone through the different topics and we will have some more material to draw upon. So that's kind of like homework. I do have a question, which maybe we can bring up about that structure. So in the pre-proposal, we had, well, what do I want to say? In there's something that's a little fuzzy to me. We have something that's very clear. There's soil, forestry, livestock, crops, and food security as kind of topical areas that are related to climate smart ag and forestry. Then we have sort of some AI themes that are sort of, you know, not necessarily cross-cutting, but like kind of orthogonal. So the decision making under uncertainty aspect is kind of clear. We also have this multi-scale. I don't know if we need to iterate on what we mean by that a little bit. Or you know, part of it was that as a theme, there's a lot of multimodal sensing, and there's a lot, you know, so that seems like a good kind of orthogonal theme. But the thing that's popped up, it's a little bit weird, is remote sensing. Remote sensing shows up in a lot of places, but it's maybe, and so this is what I want to ask is maybe remote sensing should just be kind of paired with that kind of cross-cutting theme that's the multimodal, multi-scale something. To me, that feels, as opposed to adding yet another ingredient.
Yeah,
I feel like it would be nice to see if we agree that, you know, essentially when we think remote sensing, we think that multi-scale, multimodal something, and it doesn't have to just be remote sensing. But how do people respond to that?
So you're thinking as one mechanism of multimodal sensing, or remote sensing can actually be creating sensing at a whole bunch of different modes, but it's part of multimodal sensing, or remote sensing includes multimodal sensing. I just
I guess maybe the way I would think of it is for the aspects which are like data modality issues, you know, so it's about either multi-sensor, or it's satellite imagery, or it's computer vision maybe, or it's all of those kinds of things that have to do with some sensor array or data modality issue. That also includes scaling and, you know, spatial temporal issues and that kind of stuff. If we kind of just broadly take those set of issues, which are, you know, which kind of clearly connect to some methodological challenges and themes, and think of that as one of these kind of horizontal AI type themes, and essentially just refine what our second theme was, which was previously labeled multimodal, multi-scale. That's my proposal. Okay. So if we do that, then in this small group discussion, we have things like soil through food security, and then the one that's called remote sensing can be kind of issue 2 on the AI side. The trustworthy one is the kind of social side. Oh no, sorry. The trustworthy one is more of the. We haven't really put it in here. Yeah, trustworthy, I guess, is the third theme, and then what we don't have in here currently is the first theme on the AI side, which was the decision making under uncertainties stuff. Is that okay? Then I'm going to kind of just like lightly edit the bullet points. I just want to make sure that we're on.
I think that makes sense, Kyle.
Yeah.
I actually see that it is a cross-cutting theme. Michael, I know you sent the email, and I know I talked to Zhao yesterday. You guys have met as a small group, and maybe some of the others have met as well off of last Wednesday's meeting. Do you have any questions or thoughts on how that worked and how that's going, and what we as an organization can do to facilitate that, or how we should, you know, lessons learned? We're just trying to figure out how to make it move forward. That's all.
So I thought that your feedback coming in such a timely manner, and the fact that pointing to try and take the information, I just typed up stuff very quickly from our meeting just because it was an information exchange meeting. I just typed it up so I wouldn't forget it. My memory isn't as good as it used to be. And then, so I think it was very instructive. What I worry about to some extent is one of the issues that you brought up in that in your response, is this notion of the valuing of actions. I think there's some cross-cutting kind of across all of these themes. There's lots of typically there's a higher level goal, climate change, or mitigation of climate change, or, you know, increased animal health and stuff like this. And those things are very hard to value. so I think that one thing that we could actually do or think about doing, or to bring together a lot of our ideas, is to think about how are we going to associate value with our actions. So our AI techniques are going to provide different actions based upon data, but how are we going to value those so that the guy who's actually doing the action actually gets recompensed for achieving a higher level goal? And I think this is hard to do. I think it's all very woolly at this stage, very high-minded and everything, but I think it might it is something which troubles me, but could be a driving theme which brings together all of those kind of all of those applications that you've mentioned.
That's a good question. Do you see that as something that's like a new theme? I mean, my first response is it's more like, is it part of the social theme, or is it part of the use of the decision-making and AI optimization theme?
I think that perhaps it's just a question that people who are in their themes could actually think about, and thinking about whether there are ways that we could couch this so that a reader of the proposal sees that there is communication between themes as well, or some underlying goals, even if they're high-minded and somewhat elusive. I wouldn't want to make this part of the overall proposal, because I'm not convinced that at this stage we actually have concrete suggestions on how to do
that's
it.
Okay.
Can I just plug one quick thing there? Is that in terms of the broader impacts and broadening participation and trustworthiness and listening sessions and the various things that we've discussed in that neighborhood, I think anything that's about creating value, or like how assigning value to these things, will make sense in that context. So maybe we can flag those kinds of things as important for any kind of decision-making system, because either implicitly or explicitly they're going to be there, and then connect it to the broader, the broadening, the outreach, broadening participation, et cetera, active and trustworthiness activities.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the case. And so, has anybody else had a small group meeting? I think you might be the only one, Michael, with the livestock people. That's right. Yeah, Martha too. That's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I met together with Michael and Joel today.
Okay, you were part of that as well. Okay, yeah. Well, you're the first one then. Good job. I think what makes them work is Zhao is very motivated, wants to see this happen. Oh, Victor, you were there too. You guys were all there. And so then I guess my question.
Well, I just want to say hi to Zhong Jay. I just wrote you an email to introduce myself. So I'm the one with the cameras from the vet school. And you've talked to an undergrad student about water drinking behavior. You're mentoring her.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Nice. Yeah, hi everyone. I should have introduced myself.
No, I didn't take time for that. I figured we could read about it, but we're actually a small enough group we can talk.
So, yeah, I work on computer vision and deep learning.
Okay.
Nice to meet you all. Yeah.
And actually, also
maybe
Victor, João, and we met together yesterday online to talk through things. And João is traveling today, but he met together with Michael and Zhong Jay. So there are communications underway.
Yeah, that's what I'd like. And Jim, I'd like to hear from you. Have you thought about where you would like to integrate in and what you would like to work on?
I started looking through the document and seeing people's descriptions of problems has been very helpful, and like almost every one that I looked through, I was like, oh, I think I could connect with that, but I have to kind of be not cognizant of what's realistic, right? So I was planning to today, hopefully maybe tonight, reach out to some people there. So definitely. By the way, everybody, I'm Jim Lidke. I'm in industrial engineering. I work on mathematical optimization. Optimization under uncertainty things.
Yeah. Can I make a proposal? Yeah. So one is that I think that the food security stuff definitely has like an obvious, optimization in that framing. It's not the only one, so I'm not saying I'm not trying to pick, but I would certainly look to that because I think we're kind of counting on either you or Michael or Yelena adding something in that area. So hopefully someone will. And then also, what was I going to say? Well, in terms of, I think all of the decision making side and the trustworthy part should have some discussion at some point. Those are in some sense two AI themes, but they're very related.
And I'm actually optimistic. I'm on the crops group, and that's the one I'm going to try to lead. And I'm interested in sort of a short term, we got like remote sensing things, but I think midterm is sort of a deep reinforcement learning approach where you've got sensor data and you got a daily time step or something like that, and you're observing things continuously and you're making management decisions. That sequential optimization, sequential decision making, optimizing that process. That's something we really haven't been able to do in agriculture, and I think now we have the tools. And I have a former student who's done some work on that, and I think that's my one that I think in 5 years after this has started, I'd love to have some papers on that and some progress made. After that, there's this pie in the sky thing on the, optimizing the on-farm experimentation process. I think that's further out there yet, but I think we could start down that road, and maybe in a decade or 20 years, we can have some serious progress on that. But we got to start now to get there, is my feeling. And so again, my personal interest is on the optimization side more than what I'm thinking is remote sensing, but we need that remote sensing information to throw into the optimization models.
So I have a question, and I don't want to throw a wrench in things, but I have a colleague who her expertise is reinforcement learning, and just looking at all the topics there, I just thought we could use somebody else with that as their expertise. I mean, is that in scope of something we can consider?
I think so. Kyle's been thinking about that. I don't know where he or she is.
Yeah, there were several other kind of good names on the AI side, but that at Wisconsin and some other places, but the people that I contacted with were involved in another AI thing, so they can't participate, which is annoying, but that's how NSF has structured it. I'm curious, I don't know who you're thinking of, but certainly please suggest it. And then also kind of a question for you and Michael is that I found that there to be some pretty compelling work. This is not to get in the weeds, and maybe we should do this offline, but compelling work that takes the kind of optimization as I understand that you do it, and things that look more like, operations research and combinatorial optimization and linear and quadratic, all these kinds of things, and then combine it with certain types of deep learning, particularly where graph neural networks are involved, where you can actually compose the two. And so there's been some work about, for instance, distributing fleets of automatic, self-driving cars or something, where one part of the problem is solved in a classic way and another part doesn't scale well. And so they have learned heuristics and they transfer from one city to another and all of that kind of stuff. There's a group at Stanford that does stuff like that. There's a guy at Georgia Tech that does stuff like that. I've just been hesitant to make this group any bigger. And also I don't know what your feel is about it. But to me, if we had a thread of research, which is kind of extending the kind of stuff that you guys do to also embrace some of these machine learning heuristic-y type stuff, I think that would be compelling. But if you have an idea of who a great person is for that, I certainly happy to hear from it. I can send you on the side an email with the people that I identified, and you tell me what you think.
Sure. I'll think about more, because I think it could be useful, but that specific area is something I'm actually personally moving into. So we have some coverage of that specific, direction.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, if that's the case.
But I don't want to stretch myself too thin here, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising how fast $20 million disappears.
That's true. Yeah.
That's been I've done these smaller versions of, but I think the largest has been about 8 million, but it goes fast.
Yeah, cool. I did want to kind of, before we go too much, I did kind of want to pause and hear from Catherine and Dennis, and I don't know, Victor, if you have anything to say, just since Dennis said we heard a little bit from you last time, but not much, but.
Sorry. No, go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I'm definitely interested in the crops group, just from my own personal selfishness, just to kind of learn, because I'm interested in experimentation and working with research, in a research setting. We've been working on actually been working on an NSF PIA proposal as a partnership, but like with international institutions, basically looking at, can we learn about, so there's a whole bunch of experimentation going on in Sub-Saharan Africa. So my work is focused primarily in Africa. And, just reading this summary at the beginning, it's exactly the same context, but probably much worse. There's very little information about what's happening in those research sites that could be applicable or scaled. So they potentially sometimes want to understand adoption of solutions, be it a variety of maize or beans or whatever in different regions. And there's, they make all sorts of assumptions about how their research is helping out, but it's not sort of very clear. So I'm interested in how we can blend what they're doing at the experimentation site with remote sensing in a much larger area. It's much, much more complex because of the type of agriculture, the size of the fields. So we're kind of thinking about different ways of doing different things. But then in terms of in terms of looking at the food security theme, I think would be interesting to hear the perspective of how we're defining food security. Because when I kind of think about it as a theme, I don't see it as something sort of on its own in some sense. It is, are we looking at food quality, food access, food availability? Are we looking at it in a US context? It's a very, I feel like food security is very different depending on where you're looking at it. So it would be interesting to hear that from you, as well as who could be leading this group, so that we kind of like organize in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I apologize, I've been gone for 2 weeks, but I'm back now and can think much.
No one needs to apologize, given our yeah.
We're all, I think every one of us is busy. But no, Catherine, be honest, I'm the blame in the sense that when they first pull into climate smart ag, they talk about mitigation and adaptation. And then it's very clear, if you look at the literature, they argue about if you're in we'll say a developed nations context versus a developing nations context, the third part. If you're in the US, they call it sustainable production, sustainable intensification. If you go into a non-US context, non-European, non-Japan, then it's much more like you described. And it's very clear to me, whatever mega group put together, that was some sort of compromise they came up with as who you're talking to. But it's all about, so when you talk in the US, like that's Craig Gunderson, that's very much about food access and in food security in it. And then you move into the developing nations part of the world. It's very much like what you work on, where it's about remote sensing to improve productivity. It's not about sustainable intensification anymore. It's about, and then we just added it because it's a large area of what the USDA does. It's crops, it's livestock, it's food security in the broadest sense. And so that's kind of where that came from. And then we took a US approach, and then we're trying to do something like Karen and you do. It's more about the rest of the world approach.
Mm-hmm. So
I will invite you to the crops group. That's the other thing I'll do. We're going to try to plan a meeting. I'll invite you to that.
All right. I was going to say that I think for each one of the themes, just like in the first one, would be good to have like a few papers or literature that people could look into to understand like how it's sort of being formulated. Also on the cross-cutting theme, the one for remote sensing, I think what a question we could have as prompt would be one specific to if remote sensing applies, like what data apply, what is sort of the current research in that frame. So like if it was on food security, we're looking at from the other world perspective, we're looking at crop conditions, trying to forecast yield to predict what might happen at the market. But it would be different if we're looking at it from a US perspective. So remote sensing might not apply so much. So I was just kind of thinking like having maybe a prompt on remote sensing linking with AI or something like that, where we can try and answer that question as well, maybe.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was listening and taking notes, and I realized that I didn't quite. Can you just repeat the last sentence that you said?
My last sentence was just having like a prompt.
For the theme too?
Examples of AI advances that might impact other fields, for example, as one of the prompts. It could be one on, let's see, from the first one would be like, specific, like how, I don't know, remote sensing data or whatever has been used for this particular theme. So like if you're looking at livestock, looking at pasture condition, whatever, maybe having like papers and stuff that are doing stuff like that might be helpful.
Yeah, I as we were kind of starting this and I was reorganizing it a little bit, I realized that the prompts that were all written were really meant for the kind of soil, livestock, et cetera, and they need to be kind of modified for the AI themes. And that hasn't been done. So I think that's, to your point, is that would like some mechanism to try to aggregate where that theme shows up in the different, yeah, absolutely. Okay, will do. I mean, can I ask a kind of, if you wanted to sort of take leadership on in one of these areas, since your work fits in several different places, are you particularly passionate about one of them? Or we can think about that and you can tell me offline. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but yeah, let me know, because like, I see when I think of your work, it's there's a food security part, there's a crops part, there's a remote sensing part, which is great, but it makes it, so anyways, just think about it.
I don't think that would be great to lead a theme, because my work is sort of like, I feel like all of these things are kind of interconnected and I have to think about them separately. And actually reading this or listening earlier made me think, I know nothing about food security in the context of like the US. Like I know enough, food deserts and stuff like that, but like linking it with production and, the in between of it, that kind of makes it a problem I don't know a lot about. So that's something that is important to recognize.
Yeah, that's Craig Gunderson works a lot on that. The more in the U.S. context, and how many food insecure households there are, and what are the issues they face, and what policies do we have? What of everything, our SNAP benefits and school lunch programs, but there's other things as well. He works a lot with he's done with the food banks as well. So he does a lot of stuff because there's a lot of people left behind in a lot of these programs. I think during the Great Recession, it was 15% of the U.S. population was on SNAP benefits, which I don't know if it's peaked again. I haven't seen the most recent data from the pandemic, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's gone back up again.
Can I throw out one quick thing just as a follow-up to that, and then also to get gauge some input, because I think it hits on several people here. So we had when we were writing originally, there was one idea that popped up a few times, but I like it because it involves remote sensing. It involves a few of the different topical areas. It involves potentially connections with like the Midwest Climate Hub and Dennis, trustworthiness issues, and also like an optimization point of view, which is that, but I don't, since it's not my area, tell me if I'm completely off base, but it seemed, at least in the soil context, it makes sense, which is that if you're going to use remote sensing and some sort of machine learning AI thing to take that data and try to predict something, like, so the one example was carbon soil, but it could be any of a number of things, in terms of like training data and labels and things like that, at some point you need some notion of ground truth, like literal ground truth information, and collecting that is expensive and takes time and all of the things, right? So in my mind, there's a very nice kind of package of a story to tell, which is about how you can think of it as a kind of active learning problem. You have like limited resources. Where should you go collect data? That's where you're going to learn the most about how, to train your model to be, effective, or where it's the most uncertain in terms of how it transfers from one setting to another. So there's kind of an active learning problem about deploying your resources for collecting ground truth data, but it also might involve a network of people much larger than the institute that are spread all around. And so that's where I could imagine that, like, Dennis and et cetera, and in terms of broadening participation and reaching out to people, that there's some mechanism there that could be, and also in terms of like building trust and having stakeholders contribute to the whole process. Like, I don't know, it just seems to me that there's could be a very nice story to tell there, but I'm curious what people's responses to that.
There's a whole lot of literature or people coming through the department talking about sampling efficiency. So while it's not exactly what you're saying, I think it's very closely related. So how do we sample efficiently to actually make sure that those labels that we're actually getting are really effective? So it's not quite the issue, but that sampling efficiency is related to those questions.
Yeah. So
I think it's
for sure. So there's the sampling efficiency part, but then there's also the kind of boots on the ground aspect of it, which I
like having like a citizen science component where maybe you link in with a network of potentially farmers who could contribute data. We do a lot of labeling on our own to generate labels, but this is just purely to map like cropland. And then of course there's trying to use like meta learning with like very, very, very few labels to generate a product of some sort, combining with different data layers to get somewhere. And then I guess going to sampling efficiency, some of what we've been looking at for yield data collection, we did a project in the Ukraine where with an insurance company where we're trying to determine like where would you collect yield data to have a good understanding of yield across a much larger area. And so the initial was we'd collect data as much as possible and then exclude some points to see if the accuracy gets to the same, for example, to kind of prioritize that. But there's definitely, somebody posted there's some data available from some USDA sites, for example. There's also the cropland data layer.
So actually, I think I see.
No, there's a lot of work being done in soil carbon already. There's going to be a number of USDA facilities. People are doing research on this already, so they're going to have some of this data. A number of universities have done work in this area, so there's going to be some data available there. The other part is that there is this call out for proposals now. I keep forgetting the name of it, but basically it's part of Biden's Climate Smart initiative is for people to come up with ways of assessing climate smart practices and their value. So there is very likely going to be another slew of this kind of data coming through within the next couple of years. So we can't bank on what that is right now, but if you want to incorporate that, that is another possible issue or thing to think about incorporating of sets of data.
No, this call also somewhere in there talks about ways of validating and assessing things. That's also, a theme. I'm kind of curious also about what the state of the art is in terms of like uncertainty quantification on all of this stuff, and if that really matters. I mean, are all these machine learning systems making point predictions of what they think it is, and that's that, or is there some notion of uncertainty on the predictions for these kind of remote sensing things, and would it be helpful to have those uncertainties? Seems like it, but
I don't know.
Yeah, I guess so. There is an area of deep learning, like Bayesian deep learning. Maybe that would be applicable here. I guess not quite sure for the various agriculture like topics, what kinds of uncertainty measurements would be useful. But I think in terms of the machine learning side, there's definitely some algorithms that we can build upon.
Sure. Yeah. That's why I'm asking, because I mean, that's also stuff that I do. And I think, it seems very, also for connecting things to like decision making and stuff, certainly risk and uncertainty is pretty important. And so if that's like not part of the current pipeline, but I don't know.
I think on the yield risk, estimating yields, and then because they have such market impacts that the better, and I know there's various remote sensing people, Zhou Zhang's not on, but she's been working on yield prediction. But it has huge market effects in all parts of the world. I mean, someone right now could tell us how much corn is going to be planted in Ukraine or what the yield is going to be for the wheat in the Ukraine. It would make a huge impact in the market. Everyone's pricing that. Nobody knows. And I think in other parts of the world, it's the simple things. You can have an oversupply and crash a local price, or vice versa. No one realizes there's a major shortage until it's too late, and you can plan ahead and get the extra food there. If you know the grain yields are going to be low on in some parts of the world that are more food insecure. I think uncertainty is a big deal. There's a lot of insurance programs out there in the markets both would respond to it. And I want to go back a second, Kyle, that point you made about sort of optimizing the ground truthing of remote sensing predictions. I think that sounds a lot like optimizing the on-farm experimentation problem I've been talking about in a certain sense. It's basically where do you best go out and look to see if you've got the right answer to most improve your prediction? Where do you go out, put your research plots in to be able to most improve your productivity? I mean, they're kind of and nobody really knows. They haven't really optimized that on-farm experimentation problem. They were just going to plop down standard ways of doing field and strip trial experiments. Why not optimize that process? And I think, to me, that's what you described is optimization of the data confirmation process for remote sensing predictions. I don't know how far along that is on the AI world to do that, but if that's something, to me, that sounds like a foundational advance, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of activity there. I mean, we're doing stuff within the context of some, particle physics things, which is about how do we efficiently decide what things to do next that has elements of that. And there's also kind of batch Bayesian optimization, experimental design kind of stuff there that, again, we don't have like nice formulas, we have a simulator to describe what's going on. So it actually, that kind of stuff paired with like AppSim or something, I think kind of makes sense. But there's also a really rich literature of like the classical statistical ways of doing this kind of stuff. And so what we need to do is make sure that we write it in a way that we don't get the reviewer that's like, you didn't cite the literature that I wanted you to cite, and then everyone gets mad, So, and I think there's also lots to point to about why off-the-shelf reinforcement learning is not going to solve your problem, because it's just like way too data hungry. So you really need something that's kind of like model based, that looks more like optimal control, stuff like that. But I think that's a great story, and we have the right kind of people here, and we can point to what the problems are. So I definitely have some input there.
All right, then I think I'm just looking at the time and in terms of concrete activities, I think what we need to, my vision, what we're trying to do here in the short term is kind of group up along these topical themes that get we'll say the ag-oriented people and the AI-oriented people talking to each other on something concrete. But then we have to, from those conversations, we have to back out into our major themes and how they work. And so I guess short term, you all need to figure out which themes you want to work on. And if you're up for it, be a leader. Like I know Zhao is doing that on the livestock. I'm trying to do it the crops. I'm not sure who wants to do what on the other themes, but someone's going to have to step up and kind of make this stuff happen. And start. The other big thing, like Dennis needs to have a budget figured out. All the Catherine's in the same boat. When you do the intramural or extramural communication, the subcontracting, that always, you got to get that started early. You can't wait till the end on that one for sure. The budget's so we got to start thinking that through. And everyone wants more budget than we have. And so we got to have to be conscious and make sure. I actually think some of the budgets for some of these things like the crops postdocs could actually be AI postdocs in engineering or in LNS who work with the people in the ag, and not actually be funded in the ag, but be funded over there, or vice versa. We need to think about those overlaps and how we actually can be more resource useful. I think that's the short-term thing. Get into these groups, figure that out, and then next week we start figuring out how to write about this. That's kind of the short term. The only other thing I think I'd like to talk about is broader impacts. If anyone's interested in participating in that sort of theme, but I'd like to pause there and see if do people have a sense of what to do next type of thing.
Let me just maybe a logistical. I think it just builds slightly onto what you just said there, Paul. But I guess like maybe it's one more week. But I mean, I guess we need a management team, right? That's part of the thing. And maybe it's going to be the people who emerge as the theme leaders. But I mean, I think if we can figure out that sooner than later, I know it's kind of like we got to figure that out. But like that's just going to help so much in organizing proposal writing and even organizing more of the, smaller group meetings and like budgeting
Agreed.
and things like that. So kind of figuring out who that team is going to be, I think, is a high priority. But
I'll do the crops. Joe is going to do the livestock. We need somebody to pair with these people on the AI side. I'm assuming Kyle's involved in that. I don't know if Jim, if that means you're volunteering for one of these roles.
probably, naturally I'll do one, although didn't mean to.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, either you or Michael should probably try to take the lead on theme 1, I guess, for the AI theme 1.
The optimization orientation. Yeah.
Yeah. We had thought at one point, and I've done other proposals like this where we kind of pair, like it doesn't really work for us, but sometimes we do things where we try to pair like a domain person and an AI person for the different themes, but we have kind of so many of them, it doesn't really play out very well, I think. And there's also a lot of overlap. So that I tried that once and it felt very unnatural when I tried to get into it. Okay, but I completely agree with you. And we do also, Chris, who's connected, is helping with some of the mechanical logistics, like taking lead and a lot of that now, which is wonderful because so we will try. I think maybe it doesn't make sense to try to do it online right now, but we will try to follow up as soon as possible with like leads. The other thing that we are going to need to discuss and kind of agree upon, which is basically the same thing, is like the structure of the institute and its governance and stuff like that. That's probably going to be very close to whatever happens in terms of writing it, but we will, in these big institute grants, so you have to have a pretty substantial management plan and talk about how everything is coordinated and comes together, and that needs to be compelling, and we all need to agree on it. So,
yeah. Okay, and Catherine, you kind of mentioned wanting to provide some leadership on sort of that. We'll call it broadly food security. I don't know what else to call it, but I don't know. Maybe you don't want to, but I sensed that earlier. Oh, you're on mute.
you're muted.
My computer just told me you're on mute. I think it would be great to at least meet with Karen. So I listened into the recording from Monday. I listened into all of it. So it would be good if we could, have, even if it's 15 minutes, a 15-minute call with everybody who's kind of listed here, or maybe just an email exchange might also be worth it to kind of know, what people are thinking about. I feel like my perspective might be like too broadly international, which, this could be just a side of part of what the Institute is. So I probably have some ideas about like broader impact and stuff like that, but it would be great if it's kind of grounded in what the institution is trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of what I'm worried about.
Right. Well, we should probably discuss this separately, but whatever, since time is short, I will say that given that you have a very broad view of all of this, and you also have connections both on the AI side and on the and the international aspect and lots of other things, and also the fact, strategically that you're not at UW and a few other things, I think that like you have some sort of role in what we will certainly need some kind of like steering board or whatever, something like that. So I would, think about it, and we should discuss it later, but that could be a very natural way since you have a very cross-cutting and broad view of this, and as that I think it could make a lot of sense strategically there.
Yeah. I mean, I have like more broadly like connections with GEO, which is the Group on Earth Observations, GeoGLAM, which is the Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative. So I could kind of bring that linkage with that as well. But I don't want to, I don't want to derail kind of like what could be a side opportunity as to be kind of the main opportunity of it, but.
Yeah. And I think it doesn't hurt that you also have this like connection with this AI for Climate group, right?
Yeah, the climate change AI. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I guess, does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, I'd like to kind of have some thoughts on broader impacts. How we go about that. I mean, participation. I don't know. Kyle, maybe you have some thoughts on how to lead that conversation.
Well,
I'm not sure.
I will just prompt the discussion and ask a couple of questions and then stop. So one is that, we have this trustworthy theme, and that is, in our meeting last time, we discussed how the integrating basically the intellectual merit component of that, which is, with the broader impacts and broadening participation, is very natural and how it sort of should be done. So I think there will be some of the narrative will be structured that way. We've imagined, for instance, organizing certain kinds of listening sessions and things. We have tried to cultivate a relationship with some of the Native nations in Wisconsin and kind of the surrounding area, but those discussions take a long time to evolve. So whatever we do there is probably going, at the time of the writing of this proposal and budgeting, we're probably going to have to structure it not as like very concrete activities, but things that are more like listening sessions and something that hopefully will mature during the time period of the institute. So those parts, and we have some meetings scheduled for Friday. Is that right? That have to do with some of that. So there's the Earth Partnership and there's extension and et cetera. So the thing that's less clear to me is that in terms, and so here I'm really like to hear from Dennis, is that there's another aspect, which is, there's kind of how extension works, and then there's what Dennis is doing. And I would like to hear kind of how distinct or integrated are, the activities I was just describing a little bit with what's going, more on the ground there. And where do you see that fitting, and that matters like budgetarily and also in terms of the narrative, right? And then I'd love to hear from Catherine, whatever thoughts she has on, because you mentioned it earlier about broader impacts. So.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of broader impact, I think also Karen, mentioned this yesterday, which is, trying to, whatever lessons would be learned, for example, from the crops work, particularly like with experimentation that might link with like the stuff that I mentioned that I'm looking at, that is a kind of a clear pathway. The other is looking at, if you're thinking about global food security in and itself, we're looking at, it's not only about production, it's about supply chains and things like those, where there's definitely a linkage, understanding where things are coming from, but how things get from A to B, and the consequences of events in a certain region that might, trickle down to other places. So corn production might, lead to a spike in prices for oil in Kenya, for example. So like maybe having studies that kind of link these things that seem completely disconnected, but obviously right now are being clearer and clearer that there are huge global connections. So like maybe having research or studies along those lines that kind of look at these broad themes that are, show how interconnected we all are in many ways. And food is that thing that kind of brings a lot of things together as well.
Yeah. Can I make a quick response before Dennis starts? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hog, but so everything you said, I think sounds super duper important. And in terms of the literal wording of the broader impact of the Institute, it sounds right on. In terms of the way that NSF uses the term broader impacts, I think that would most of what you described as I heard it would be considered intellectual merit and be kind of lumped into the research component or something like that. And that a lot of what they're talking about with broader impacts are, they're like workforce development, education and outreach, the global competitiveness, broadening participation, things along those lines, which are, whichever. So I think that, and the more that we can, merge together, like, so that those activities are also connected to the research component and the intellectual merit, the better. But in the proposal, there will be, a lot of the people that are going to be reviewing it are going to be thinking RU programs and like going out to schools and giving talks or, things along those natures.
Things like that.
Yeah, so like the broader impact section is essentially like the outreach section for a lot of people, even though you could also talk about things that are like workforce development or like how do you bring veterans into the, or et cetera. But I think, and I don't know as much about USDA, but certainly on the NSF side, that's largely what people are looking for.
I think that's, I mean, from what you described, that's a lot simpler. I wish I could get credit for all the stuff that I've done like that. Because I mean, we've been doing like NASA videos for high school students.
That's what we're talking about.
Down these like very complicated questions like where does your food come from, and then we could kind of relate with like satellite data and how we're monitoring things. So it could be like an education and outreach type program like that. There's also the broader impact of like involving farmers in some sense as part of the research. There could be contributing work, data, for example. Some of the other broader outreach or broader impact that we've kind of done, have a project called Helmets Labeling Crops, which is just we're driving, you're taking pictures, and then we use computer vision to identify the crops, turn that into labels to do cropland mapping. So in the process of explaining that to a very lay person, they kind of understand the entire stream and how we end up using the product. And then we end up having like a huge network of people who are able to like contribute data, who then learn about all the different things that we're doing in the process. I think that sounds like it kind of fits with the education part.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What did you call that project?
Oh, it's called Helmets Labeling Crops. So like
like
a helmet, we have a GoPro on a helmet, and then we drive, or a car. It's a really cool project. It's my favorite because it's in the field. It has to be done in the field. So we can do some. We've tested some of that in the US. Like as we're driving, we're taking pictures and then we convert that into labels later on.
That's great.
Okay.
So I think with our time, can we switch to Dennis? And there's not a lot. We need to have a dedicated meeting with you, Dennis, soon. But like, what's your?
And I'm trying to calibrate NSF broader impacts versus USDA broader impacts. USDA broader impacts, you guys aren't anywhere near that yet. It's who's using what you're creating on the ground. Who is going to use it and how are they going to use it? We haven't touched that yet. And because I can't figure out what is actually going to, what the it is going to be for someone to be able to use. And, when we're dealing with that on the USDA side, that's where we have to get is you've created something, you've talked to people who are going to use it, data, tools, whatever it is, and how you're going to make that bridge. And I threw a thing in on the Google Drive of just saying, maybe the broader impacts we need to have is how we bridge AI data to end users. Because I think there's a huge gap between AI and users on the ground. There's a huge gap. And I think working out ways of trying to be able to do that is something that might be useful as part of this too.
Yeah. Well, no, that sounds great. If the if that's the USDA version of the broader, we should probably hit on both because since it's both and we don't know what but that part of that USDA style broader impacts certainly seems very natural for what we're trying to do. It seems like with what you're doing and with what like Extension does, that seems very much along those lines. There's, the mechanism is there. Yeah. And then your point is like, what's the it? Is that?
Well, okay. Is USDA reviewing these two or just NSF?
Both, I think.
Okay. If USDA is reviewing it, you really need to show an integration between what is happening on the research side and how that is being used on the ground. It can't be we're creating something and we're going to kind of send it out and see what happens. There has to be a very tight tie that's very clear between those two. So,
yeah.
I think the linkage with the crop, one of like the linkage with the crop theme. I just typed in under like broader impacts, like some kind of like AI enabled decision support tool where whatever it is that you could learn from the experimentation, we're studying a lot of like what's happening in a small area that could be scaled to a much larger area, and maybe having like potentially I'm going to use the word demonstration, but that's not really what I mean. Like a farmer who could be involved as a test bed, a test site where you're developing methods somewhere, and then you're trying to make it relevant for what they need, because you want to know. Like the farmer's trying to figure out things, which is, what is explained in that paragraph at the top of the crop theme. So if the farmer can say specifically, like, I want to know what to fertilize with, for example, that is most suitable for so it's kind of like a linkage between what we would learn under the crops theme, linking that with some actual utility, like an actual user. I don't know.
I think Dennis had to go. So we will need to schedule some follow-up there. I think what maybe, I mean, I'm still a little unclear about if we should, if there's more than one of these kind of major outreach components, and one looks like education outreach and one is more like the USDA style extension kind of work. Dorothy?
I was going to answer Dennis, but that's okay. I just want to mention, is that meant like the AI research is going to be used by end users, or is it the applications of what the AI research improves that are going to be used? Because we're going to have an expert panel of beef cattle producers expressing what do they need from AI to improve their situation. I'm giving keynote lectures. I'm training beef cattle producers about all of this, but is that too applied? I'm teaching veterinary students about applied artificial intelligence for veterinary medicine. Is that what we're talking about?
It could be like a pathway, I think, like from the more complicated, this is how the model works, blah, blah, blah. But it'd be like how the product from all this analysis or research ends up improving something that is done practically. Like, I think it could be just a way of describing that pathway. Which is like from data models and everything to actual improvement, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that in the pre-proposal and I think in the main one, we will need to hit on sort of 3 styles of AI research. Roughly, one are like applications where it's actually being done. The other one is this kind of use inspired, which is where are the AI techniques lacking, and where does there need to be AI, methodological development, and then there's and then the extreme version of that is where you've abstracted it a lot, and it's like foundational, kind of more theoretical type research. So the part that is, in the applied direction are the kinds of things that can be things that are actually being deployed, and that where extension and all the kinds of conversations that you're talking about are very relevant. And I think when we pair it with the trustworthy theme also, whatever frictions there are about getting people to adopt it or trust it or, participate and share the data that they need to make the thing work, there's a whole theme about making sure that that works. And that in some sense, we can use that as kind of a foundational piece, because it's got an academic, intellectual merit part about, trustworthiness and et cetera. So I don't know if that's kind of how I would think that we should try to, pitch it, that all the applied stuff really is applied, and anything we can say about extension and Paul mentioned the crop consultants, and you mentioned this expert panel, and all of that's great. And if we learn through that, we learn that there's something that's not good, about the solutions, then we can use that. We can tell a story, the kind of use inspired story about this is what's wrong with these solutions, either technically or in terms of trustworthiness or some practical aspect. Then that's I think the story we want to tell.
Sorry, just quick comment. From my experience, I wasn't dealing with the NSF USDA partnership, and from my experience on that, NSF runs the business. They operate like the NSF, and USDA they see, but the way the proposal are.
Yeah, I might give him a call afterwards and see what he's been trying to jump in several times. He got some sort of serious feedback loop or something.
Yeah, sorry, Joao, you need to type, I think, if you want us to see, but
Yeah, Joe, I'll give you a call afterwards too. That number you called me at yesterday, and try to figure out what you were been trying to put in. I'm not so worried about the traditional extension stuff. We've got several of us on the particularly the crop and the livestock side. We just have to tell the story. But I'm more worried about the NSF version if we can meet that. That's I think your Earth Partnership stuff and stuff that you mentioned, Catherine, about videos and the stuff we do with high school and junior high, recruiting people into STEM and things like that, and getting them interested into the ag part of it. You know, using AI. Workforce development is a big issue. To be honest, a lot of these technologies on the AI side, in the US, I do not see the farmers being the ones using them. I see the crop consultants being the ones using them and helping the farmer do it. And we need to train the crop consultant. Just like you hire a veterinarian, you don't do health stuff yourself. You used to get a few shots, but anything serious, you got the vet in. Anything serious in AI, you bring in the crop consultant. That's what I think is how it's going to be done. It's going to be another service that somebody provides. At least in the U.S. context, is my guess. It's time. I don't know. We might keep people longer. I think we're going to have we're going to have a crops group meeting, and Catherine, I'll invite you to that. Plus, sort of the standard people. Jim, if you're interested, I'll invite you and/or Michael. You guys can decide. It'll probably be shoot for tomorrow or Monday just to get things moved along. I did type some stuff up in the template on the crop side. And the other big one is this broader impacts. We're gonna have to sort that one out. And I'm not sure who all to invite and everything, but we're gonna have to sort that one out. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, there's the template there. And I think that's where we're at. I don't know. Then any questions or comments? I don't want to keep people too long. Maybe they've got other things, but